I feel like there's a lot of misinformation about safety in Seattle. In general, I really feel like some things can be a little bit blown out of proportion. So I would not say Seattle is that affordable on the outset. Like, you do kind of have to make specific decisions to make it more affordable. A few neighborhoods that I think are definitely hidden gems that I think a lot of people should explore and that I think could get some more love. The first one is
What comes to mind when you think of Seattle? For some, Starbucks, the Space Needle, and of course, rainy weather. But there's a lot more to this Pacific Northwestern town than you might think. Travel Lemming's own Chelsea Booker joins me today for a deep dive into all things Seattle, from her favorite hidden gems to how to navigate the weather. We're changing up the format of the show today just to give Chelsea the full spotlight since she has so many wonderful tips about Seattle. But after our interview, I'm going to be sharing with you our biggest project of the year, our list of the top 50 places to visit in 2025. More on that in a bit, but for now, let's jump right into why you should plan a trip to Seattle. A very warm welcome to Chelsea Booker. She's one of our amazing editors here at Travel Lemming. Chelsea's lived in Seattle for the past almost 15 years, and she's our expert on all things Seattle. She's written some really great pieces on the best things to do in the city, the best restaurants, coffee shops, which is huge to me because I'm a big coffee connoisseur. She's also got some really awesome perspective pieces on local travel and exploring the nearby Pacific Northwest areas. So we're going to get into all of that as well as some of Chelsea's favorite hidden gems in Seattle. But first, I want to just go ahead and throw it over to her and allow her to introduce herself. So, Chelsea, thank you so much for being here with me today and welcome to the Travel Lemming podcast.
Thank you. I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for asking me to come on and just to get to geek out about my favorite place, Washington and Seattle. It just has my heart. And yeah, like you said, I've been here for about 15 years. I came here in kind of a roundabout way. It's funny, my early childhood, I lived in Las Vegas, which, it was totally different. It's desert, all of that. And then my family, we moved up to Rochester, which is an area in upstate New York. And I remember getting there and seeing like trees, like greenery and clouds and like gray weather for the first time. And I think it just completely captivated me. And then we moved to California. And I remember just liking more of the bigger city vibe because we moved to LA. But then I guess you could say I developed a taste for cloudy weather because I came back to Seattle and I've been here ever since. So yeah, like you said, I'm an editor at Travel Lemming. I currently live here with my dog and my husband. And yeah, I'm really excited to chat about all of my favorite places.
Yes, and I'm so glad that I have the opportunity to talk to you about this because my brother actually just moved back to Arizona from Seattle. Well, he was in Gig Harbor, which is on the outskirts of the city. I know, like an hour outside. And it was a kind of a similar thing where, he grew up in Arizona and had always wanted like that greenery and the trees and the clouds and the rain and the just seasons because we don't really get that here. And so I would go visit for the past 6 years, and so I thought I knew things to do in Seattle. And then I see all the things that you've written, I'm like, "I haven't done any of these things," and for those of you who haven't checked it out yet, Chelsea has a really awesome list of the 63 best things to do in Seattle. So she's obviously the expert. She talks about things to do in the outdoors, free things, museums, events, attractions, things to do on rainy days, as well as restaurants. And it's so informative. I think I've done like one of these things on this list. And also, all the times I've been to Seattle, it's been in the summertime because my family always says, "Oh, come in the summer."
Ah.
So I've rarely experienced it myself when it's rainy, which like I have this unrealistic vision of Seattle where it's always
Mhm.
sunny and beautiful, perfect weather. And I know that's not typically the case. So I'm excited because I know you said you have some really great ideas about what to do during that time, which I think is right now, right? Like when is the rainy season?
Oh, we are fully into the rainy season. I do often tell people that if you want to fall in love with Seattle and just like the surroundings, definitely come in the summertime. That is the time to come because it is gorgeous. The weather is perfect. It's not too hot. But I think that there is just something about the rainy season that just feels more authentically Seattle and just Pacific Northwestern. It's funny, after living here for almost 15 years, I now find myself after summer being like, oh gosh, when is the rain going to come? So you really do start to adapt to it. And I think you just see a little bit more of an authentic side when you come during the rainy season.
Yes, well, I would love to get into that. So, why don't we just go ahead and dive right into why we're here today? Why do you think people should visit Seattle? What are the main reasons that make it worth exploring?
Of course. So I'm going to take it a little broad first and just talk about Washington in general, and then I'll narrow more in on Seattle. And so, one of the main reasons to come to Washington, it's absolutely beautiful here. There are so many different landscapes. Washington is called the Evergreen State for a reason. All of that rain makes it just glow green. It's absolutely beautiful. And you have the mountains and you have the water. You have the Cascade Mountain Range, you have the Olympic Mountain Range. And beyond that, there are volcanoes, there are islands, there are lakes and waterfalls. There's so many different opportunities for outdoor recreation. Like if you're a nature lover, you will just be spoiled in Seattle and Washington. One thing I don't think people realize too is it's not all green though, is because if you head to Eastern Washington, which I will admit, like I want to do more exploring out east, but if you head to Eastern Washington past the Cascades, it's actually a totally different environment because you have lots of farmland, you have these landscapes that seem almost prehistoric. It's gorges and coulees and things that were carved that way by Ice Age era floods. So it's really magnificent. And the other thing I would say is that you should come to Seattle because it's situated so perfectly that you can easily access a lot of that. Washington has 3 national parks. You can get to all of them from Seattle within 2 to 3 hours. So it's easy to take a lot of day trips from Seattle to all of these different islands. Bainbridge, Vashon are great places.
And I feel like a lot of people think that Washington is just like they think of Twilight, like it's just constantly in this foggy mist, and there's so many different areas.
Yeah, yeah. I like to say Western Washington, like come in the wintertime, bring a raincoat. Eastern Washington, you're going to need a bigger puffy jacket, something to keep you warm because they do get snow over there.
So, with that, like how far is Seattle from the coast? Because I think a lot of people have a misconception that Seattle is located on the ocean because they see the water, which I think I thought when I was a kid that it was right there. So, how far is Seattle from the ocean and how does that differ from the sound
Mhm.
environment there?
Yeah, so if you are going to the coast, it'll take you about 3 plus-ish hours, I would say. You can do it in a day trip. I have done that in a day trip. And I would say it's nice to have the sound. So the Puget Sound, it is technically part of the Pacific Ocean, but it's a series of waterways that goes down. So you're not going to have wild crashing waves and that kind of thing. If you do go to the coast, that's where you get it. And honestly, the Washington coast is magnificent. It's very wild, very rugged, but it is nice that we have the sound because whale watching is one of the major things to do in Washington. Sometimes you can see them from various points. Like I live in West Seattle, and just last week, like the J-pod orcas were sighted from land. So you can see these magnificent beings without having to go to like the coast. And especially if you're going up by the San Juan Islands, there's whale watching tours over there.
That's awesome. So, back to Seattle. So, getting there, is it pretty easy? Like, how do you recommend getting around? Would you rent a car? Is there good public transport?
So first of all, when you're first landing, the great thing about the SeaTac airport is that it's connected to Seattle by the light rail. If people come visit me, I don't pick them up from the airport. I give them directions to get onto the train, and then I'll pick you up at another stop. It's really simple to get from the airport into downtown. It takes maybe 40-ish minutes. And then when you are in Seattle, you don't have to rent a car. Seattle is super walkable, and public transit makes it really easy to get around as well. So the light rail is a key thing that links the south and the north side. And there's a lot of expansion that's currently happening right now. Like the north end just opened, so it goes beyond Northgate all the way up to Linwood, which is a suburb further up Washington, and then it's eventually going to connect down to Federal Way, which is just north of Tacoma. But beyond that, getting from SeaTac to Seattle and to all of the various neighborhoods along the way in South Seattle and North Seattle is very easy. You also have the buses, which are pretty good. There are a couple streetcars that run through some of the major neighborhoods in Seattle. And again, Seattle's very walkable. Like it's not very sprawling. So if you're downtown, you can literally go to the top attraction. You could go to Pike Place Market, easily walk down to the waterfront, walk back up to Olympic Sculpture Park, and then to Seattle Center. And then you can take the monorail back downtown. It's very simple to get around. It's really nice, especially if you don't want to rent a car. So I would say though, if you are coming to Seattle and you're just like basing yourself in Seattle, and you want to go out to explore more out in the mountains or do lots of hikes, then you probably will want a car. That's just the simplest way. There is a bus that will take you during the summer months only to some of the major hiking trails. So that's kind of one of my budget tips too, is you can save a lot if you're just planning on using public transit and walking.
That's a great budget tip too about visiting there and not necessarily having to pay that massive fee every day for a car. So, back to Seattle, things to do. What are your main reasons for coming there? Like, what are the greatest things that you think someone, either a newcomer or even a local who hasn't fully explored the city, what are those main attractions that you think are worth visiting?
Yeah, so you definitely need to start with Pike Place Market. That's the number one attraction.
It's a classic.
It's a classic, but it's so worth it. You know, even as a local, it's pretty much always crowded and it can be overwhelming, but I always just have so much fun. It is partially because I know it really well, but there's always lots of activity there. That's the place where you'll find flower vendors, fruit vendors. You have people who are just going to be plying you with samples as you walk through, which is always a nice little touch. And then you have a lot of really good restaurants, whether you want like a sit down, like the Pink Door, which is a popular Italian place. It's in Post Alley and it's only identifiable by a pink door. And that one is pretty cool because they often have live music or burlesque shows or cabaret while you're having dinners. But you can also just go somewhere like Land of Origin, which is a tiny little shop that is one of my personal favorite hidden gems in Pike Place Market. And they have all these different pastries from different African countries. So Pike Place Market is definitely where I think everyone should go, not only for food, souvenirs, and just like to people watch, also for the views. But I would also say the other two main attractions are the waterfront and Seattle Center. And like I said, you can actually get there very easily. The Pike Place Market Overlook Walk just opened in October, and that's really convenient because now you can go from the market and you can easily walk down to the waterfront. And it has this extra seating area. Come summer, they're probably going to have a lot of events too that they're going to put on there. There's also like a little play area for kids, and just the views out over the sound from here, like definitely go at sunset. It is so gorgeous. And yeah, then if you're crossing the overlook, you can go down to the waterfront. And if you head south, you'll see the aquarium, the Great Wheel, and the more touristy stuff. You know, if you have something booked over there, like a boat cruise, that's where you would go, and that's fine. But I would say to go north toward Olympic Sculpture Park, which is actually a free part of the Seattle Art Museum. So it's exactly what it sounds like. It has a bunch of abstract sculptures and a walking path. And as you're walking up this way, you come to the Seattle Center. You start to see the Space Needle, and that's your little indicator of where you're going. And the Seattle Center is great. It's kind of like the cultural center of Seattle. So you have the Space Needle, of course. You have the Museum of Pop Culture. You have a lot of very kid-friendly attractions like the Children's Museum and PacSci, Pacific Science Center. They also have a lot of cultural events throughout the year there too. They have Croatian Fest, they have Diwali, they have all sorts of different cultural festivals. And if you are in the Seattle Center, one thing that I would do as well is go to KEXP, which is like a local radio broadcast that actually started at the University of Washington, I want to say in the 70s or 80s. And that's a really cool spot for music lovers too, because they have like live DJs there and a lot of events that you can go to.
Yeah, that is exactly what I would wanna do there, and I feel like there's just something for everyone in Seattle. Like, everything you're talking about,
Oh, yeah.
there's cultural things for such a diverse group. There's a lot of indoor things, which, again, if it is raining and it's during the rainy season, like, you don't wanna go outside because it's gray and gloomy and rainy. It's like there's so many things that you can still go out and explore and still enjoy
Yeah.
the city.
And it's so funny because I think people are under the assumption that we don't go out when it's rainy, but we do. Like you just have a good rain jacket because a lot of people in Seattle don't use umbrellas. If you do, it's fine. It's not a big deal. But yeah, like people still go out, people still go hiking, people still, you know, like I went to Alki Beach last winter and it was packed. People were still out and about, just bundled up, and it's really nice because you can get your hot coffee. Hot coffee tastes better when it's cold out, in my opinion.
Very true. Yeah, you just kind of got to adapt to the weather.
Yeah, exactly. Another misconception I think people have is that they think of the rain here as like really heavy pouring showers, where we do like sometimes get that, but more often than not, it's more drizzly for a little bit and then it'll stop and then the clouds will clear, the sun will come out and then it'll like, and the clouds will come back and then it's drizzly again. So, if you're looking at the weather forecast and it's like, oh, it's going to be rainy all week, it's not going to just be constantly pouring all week. But actually, you can check out one of my articles about this, my Seattle tips.
Yeah, which again, we are going to be linking all of these articles that Chelsea has written in the show notes. So make sure to check those out later. But yeah, I definitely do think that a lot of people are kind of dissuaded from going because of that. But it's really manageable when you're there.
Oh, yeah, it's manageable as long as you just have rain jacket, waterproof boots, and you're pretty much set to go. Yeah.
And so I know that we mentioned earlier that you're in the rainy season right now, and we're recording this right now in November. This might be posted a little bit later. But what are those exact months that you have the sunny summer months, and when does it start getting into the rain, and when does that lighten up? If you can give us a timeline just so people kind of have a better idea of when they might want to visit.
Yeah, so I would say the clearer, non-cloudy days usually start around mid-May. So from mid-May to about mid-October, you can usually count on it being mostly dry. And the transition is pretty stark, like mid-October and then all the way through April. You're going to get some rain for the most part. October, I think, is a really good time to come because you have all of the changing fall foliage and then the crowds have started to disperse. It can be unpredictable weather-wise, but I think it's still very good. You get that crisp fall. The rainiest months, I will say, are probably between November and February. In January or February, sometimes we end up getting snow.
So, on the topic of that, sounds like perfect coffee weather. And I know that Seattle is the coffee capital of the United States, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it's the birthplace of Starbucks. And I know I've walked past that Starbucks. I think the original one, it's right across from Pike Place Market, right?
There's a Starbucks in Pike Place Market, and a lot of people are under the impression that that's the first Starbucks, and it's not. You actually said the right thing. It's called the original Starbucks, and that's because the first Starbucks doesn't exist, but they moved a lot of the historical information and that kind of stuff to that Starbucks. I would say skip that Starbucks. There's always a long line of tourists.
Well, and that's what I was going to say because I've never actually gone into that one because I always see a line wrapped around the whole block to get into that Starbucks. And it's just like, what is going to make this unique? And the fact that I didn't realize it wasn't the first one. So there's so much great coffee in Seattle. I would rather go to a local store and support local than go into the
Yeah.
original Starbucks and wait for an hour just to set foot in there to get something I could get in Arizona and anywhere else in the world.
Exactly. If you're coming to Seattle, please try like the local indie shops. If you do really want Starbucks, go to the Starbucks Reserve Roastery, which is right on the edge of Capitol Hill in downtown. And that one's pretty cool because they actually have experimental blends. You can see them roasting it.
Yeah, not to knock any Starbucks lovers out there.
Yeah, like it's okay. But I really think that if you want more of the coffee culture, you have to go to the smaller shop. So if you're looking for like coffee bean, like really good drip coffee and single origin coffee, I would say Herkimer Coffee, Olympia Coffee Roasters has really great beans. One of my favorites in West Seattle is C&P Coffee, and that one is really cool. They have a lot of events like open mics, they have silent reading nights and all of that.
And do you have a list of your favorite coffee shops in Seattle on Travel Lemming's website?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, we'll have that in the show notes, of course, too, which I will for sure be looking out for my next visit to Seattle. And one other thing I really wanted to talk about is the music scene, because I know Seattle's the birthplace of like quite a few really big bands. And one of the big reasons my cousin wanted to move there is because she's such a concert goer. And she always said, I just want to live in Seattle because I could go to a concert every single week. And she basically does that. And so,
Yeah.
what are some of like the really cool venues? I know that there's some really small, intimate ones there, as well as really big arenas. Where do you recommend people go to see some of those really great smaller artists?
So I recently went to a show at the Moore Theater, which is in Belltown. You can usually catch some smaller acts there. There is also Tim's Tavern, which is in White Center, which is a hidden gem that I don't think a lot of people know that much about. They pretty much always have live music shows, and the most I've seen is maybe $15 to get in. I also really like Showbox Soto, where I saw some of my first concerts when I moved here.
Yeah. Well, I love
Yeah.
it. So, Chelsea, tell me how you feel about affordability in the city. Is it a pretty affordable place to visit?
Yeah, so I would not say Seattle is that affordable on the outset. Like, you do kind of have to make specific decisions to make it more affordable. Like I mentioned earlier, using public transit instead of renting a car, walking on the ferries. I would also say hitting up happy hours. Alibi Room in Pike Place Market has a really good happy hour. Seattle can be pretty expensive, but it's just more that you need to do a lot of research and then you can find out where are the places that are more budget friendly.
Yeah. So do you think like hotels or Airbnbs,
Mhm.
like, is there really a difference, do you think, in the price points for those, or do you think they're all pretty much the same?
Yeah, so there's definitely a range of hotels, and you can find some more budget-friendly hotels and also a hostel. There's I believe it's called the Green Tortoise Hostel in downtown Seattle, so if you want, like, the cheapest option, that one's a good choice. But in general, it's a little pricey. One area I would recommend and that I recommend in my guide for where to stay is the U District, and the reason for that is because the hotels can be a little bit cheaper, but then you also have easy access to the light rail. So that makes it so that you're not staying right in downtown where it's the most expensive, but you can easily get there to, go to the attraction. And also in the U District, there's this strip called the Ave where they have cheaper eateries and stuff, especially because the University District is what that stands for. So, you have more of a youthful atmosphere. You have college students and stuff there. And with that comes some cheaper food. And it's not like cheap and bad. Like there's a lot of really good tasty food up that way as well. So it's just about choosing the right place to stay.
Right.
Yeah.
So they've got quite a range there. Well, that's great.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for that. And also, how is the safety situation in Seattle?
Yeah, so I feel like there's a lot of misinformation about safety in Seattle. Seattle is a big city, but it kind of has the vibe of a mid-sized city, but it is a big city. So you do have to use the same precautions that you would in any big city. I will say, like, there are certain areas definitely where you'll see more people experiencing homelessness and that kind of thing. But in general, I really feel like some things can be a little bit blown out of proportion. So there are certain areas like in downtown that are not necessarily dangerous. I wouldn't go and explore them at night, or I'd just be really cautious. But in general, Seattle is a very safe area. And if you want like places that are considered the safest, there's West Seattle, certain places in North Seattle, like Ballard, and these places kind of on the outskirts, but it's kind of like the same things that all big cities really struggle with.
Right. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that there have definitely been some things I've seen about Seattle since especially like 2020 and onward.
Hmm.
And I do think you're right. I think a lot of things like people will get hooked on one major story and then suddenly that becomes the personality of the entire city, which isn't necessarily true. I mean, it's rarely true. So
Hmm.
every time that I've visited, I've never felt unsafe. But also, don't be running around in the streets in the middle of the night, maybe going out to the bars and all that. But yeah, I think for the most part, from what I've experienced, I've always had a very pleasant time. So you think
Yeah.
for families, solo travelers, it's still a great place to visit.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I definitely think so. And especially like if you are just hanging out at the main attractions in those areas, they're perfectly safe. Like honestly, I've even been through Pike Place Market and that whole area in the evening, on my way to go to the Moore Theater recently. And it was
Hmm.
perfectly fine. The Seattle Center, especially, I often suggest like the Queen Anne area for families, especially because the Seattle Center is very safe, even in evenings, especially because there's always lots of events like at Climate Pledge Arena and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Lovely. Well, I think that that's really all I have for you right now, Chelsea. Are there any other things that you wanted to discuss or anything I might be missing about why people should visit Seattle or anything in particular that they should know before they go?
Yeah, a few neighborhoods that I think are definitely hidden gems that I think a lot of people should explore and that I think could get some more love. The first one is White Center, which technically it's an unincorporated community. It's not like technically part of Seattle, but it's just south of West Seattle and it feels like Seattle. And the reason I really like this is because I think it feels like the Capitol Hill is right now like the most popular neighborhood. Like everybody knows about it. And when I moved here 15 years ago, like I lived kind of in the Capitol Hill area, it felt pretty different. It still had a little bit of the grunge, a little bit of that, I guess, counterculture feel to it. It's still a great place to go, but it's definitely trendier, it's more expensive and all of that. And so White Center is a place that to me feels like Capitol Hill did all those years ago. It's definitely more up and coming. There's a lot of new businesses, and one of the reasons I really like it is just it feels much more communal, more so than like when I go out to a bar in Capitol Hill, I don't really expect, to strike up a conversation with other people. But pretty much every time I go to a bar in White Center, we're all chatting, people are chatting together, and, you're meeting people. I went to this one place called Future Primitive in White Center, which is one of my favorite breweries, and ran into a group just watching sumo wrestling, and we all just got together for weeks after and just went to go watch sumo wrestling together there. It's really great. And there's so many gems there. There's Two Finger Social, which is like this really cool movie bar. My husband absolutely loves it. He's a really big movie guy. And you go in and you see all of like these props from things like Alien, Caddyshack, like all over the bar. And it's just like a very cool vibe. They sometimes have like burlesque shows there. There's also Lariat Bar, which is a wrestling theme bar. And same thing, the decor is just very fun. There's a life-size, I guess, Andre the Giant poster there, and they have a little wrestling ring where you can do karaoke. Plus, during community events, they actually host live wrestling matches. So if you are ever in White Center in the summertime for the block party, you should definitely go check that out. It's tons of fun. And then there's also one last place. There's Tomo, which is converted into a fine dining restaurant from an adult video store.
My gosh, so funny.
It's a very interesting,
Yeah, it sounds like it has a lot of personality.
yeah, a lot of personality for sure. And then I definitely recommend West Seattle. It's not like the most hidden gem, but I think West Seattle has a lot of tiny little parks and places to do urban hiking and that kind of thing that I don't think a lot of people realize. There's Camp Long and a Longfellow Creek Trail that I just stumbled upon when I was walking my little dog. So West Seattle, if you're very outdoorsy and you want to go like hiking without having to leave the city, I definitely recommend that. Even just the hike along Alki will take you to, different parks like Jack Block Park, where you can have a really great view of downtown Seattle, and Constellation Park, where you can go tide pooling and all of these kind of things. So
Yeah, it's not like you have to drive all the way to the Cascades or Mount Rainier to go on a hike or do these outdoorsy things. It's right there.
no, yeah, exactly. There's like a lot of places like that in the city. And I'll also mention Beacon Hill, which I have to shout out because I used to actually live in the neighborhood and I think it's very underrated. It's right on the light rail line, so it's super easy to get to. And its food scene is actually getting a lot of buzz. There's Musang, which is Filipino, I believe it's Filipino fusion. And then Homer is like a Mediterranean restaurant that has the best pitas, and they give you like a bunch of dips for them. Beacon Hill is also a really great spot for, again, like the community of Seattle. So there's the station and El Centro de la Raza are two places that do a lot for just the community that lives there. And then there's the Beacon Food Forest, which is the largest public food forest in the nation. It's like a 7-acre volunteer run food forest. And you can walk through this. You can, help out at work parties, but also you can forage for free there. So it's open to harvest.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
never heard of a food forest before.
Yeah, it's so cool. And it's funny, I learned about it like after I moved away from Beacon Hill, but their whole mission is to help with food insecurity for people in the neighborhood. I think it's really cool that you can just kind of go year round, like they're out there making sure the garden is thriving year round. Okay, and the last place I will talk about is Georgetown, which is more of an industrial neighborhood. It kind of reminds me of Tacoma a little bit, like a mini Tacoma in Seattle. It's very industrial. If you go down the main strip of Airport Way, like you'll probably see trains going by and have planes overhead. But there are some really cool gems there. There's the Georgetown Steam Plant, which in the early 20th century, that's where all of Seattle's streetcars used to get their power from that used to power all of those. Eventually, when we switched to hydroelectric power, but it's been designated as like a national historic landmark, and it's a very cool place. I went on a tour there, had to be, this was pre-pandemic. I believe it was in 2018, and it's very cool if you kind of like the vibe of steampunk type things. I like to say if you like Gasworks Park, which is a really cool park in North Seattle that has these old gasification plants. You can't explore them or anything, but if you want that vibe and you want to see history as well, then go to Georgetown Steam Plant, and they do free tours, I believe, like twice a month. And so that's really cool. And they're converting it into a space for like art shows and education and that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
that's one thing in Georgetown. And then, like, in complete contrast with that, it has the Corson Building, which is a restaurant that I believe is also early 20th century, but it's a very beautiful building. It's like these gorgeous gardens with these antique looking statues, like red brick building, and you can get one of the best meals in Seattle there. So you have this very industrial and then very pretty and vintage-esque place all in Georgetown. Yeah, those are some of the gems. I don't think get enough love, but they really should.
No, thank you so much for those. And actually, it's funny. I used to work at a brewery in Tucson, and our brewer had moved from Seattle, and he was the brewer at Georgetown Brewing. And so
No
the one
way.
time, yeah, and he's amazing at what he does. And when I went to Seattle a few years back, my cousin was like, "Why do you want to go to Georgetown?" And she had never really been there either. I was like, "Well, we got to go try the beers at this brewery." And it was fantastic. And it was, like you said, there were a lot of like very cool historic buildings, but then also it just looked very like industrial, and this like
Hmm.
juxtaposition of the buildings. I really enjoyed it there. So I'm so happy that you mentioned that and all these other hidden gems. It's been so great talking to you about Seattle today. And you really are the expert. And for all of you listening, we're going to link all of Chelsea's amazing articles. Well, not all of them, but the ones that were mentioned today. And I strongly encourage you to go check out her page at travellemming.com. She's one of my favorite writers. You truly are. I'm not just saying that. I
Oh,
love
oh,
your
thank you.
imagery and the photos you post. Chelsea's a fantastic writer. So we are just so lucky to have you. And I'm so glad that we got to talk all about Seattle today. So is there anything else that you wanted to mention before we say our goodbyes?
I think we covered a lot of it. And I would just say come to Seattle with an open mind. I think we get a lot of representation that we're very rude or we're all, passive aggressive, which that one might be a little bit true. But I think that definitely come with an open mind. I think come seeking out nature and knowing that the people are very kind and there's tons to do here in any
Right.
season, even if you come in the rainy season. I had a friend visit me in November and it was one of the best visits I've ever had. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Don't be afraid of the rain, people. And I know we didn't really cover things outside of Seattle because we wanted to really focus on things to do in the city, but Chelsea again has some really great articles on some of the really amazing places in the Pacific Northwest, especially for outdoorsy things like your article on backpacking to Stehekin, the most remote
Oh, yeah.
town in America or the Pacific Northwest. I can't quite
In
remember.
Washington.
In Washington. I'm being so exaggerative. Ha! The most remote town in the
It is
whole
pretty remote,
world.
though.
But yeah, and it was so great. So again, check out Chelsea's work. She's fantastic. And thank you all so much for listening. If you have any comments, questions about Seattle, if you want to talk about your own experiences in the city or want to mention some of your own hidden gems, we'd love to hear about them. So thank you so much for being here, Chelsea. It was a pleasure getting to talk to you today.
Yeah, I had so much fun. Thank you, Betty.
Of course. All right. We'll see you soon. As promised, our 2025 list of the best places to travel. Every year, Travel Lemming's team of experts collaborate to create a list of the best places to travel in the upcoming year. Dozens of us get together to make this spectacle of a list. It's always one of our most popular articles, and it's a super fun way to spark your wanderlust. To find it, all you have to do is search Travel Lemming, places to travel, in whatever search engine you use. Now, last year, our top destination was Mexico's Yucatan. In fact, Nate actually goes into a deep dive on why it's the most authentic place to visit in Mexico in our second episode of the podcast. In case you missed it, I strongly suggest going back and giving that episode a listen. It is jam-packed with amazing tips and information on the best ways to visit the state. But anyway, our list of the top places to visit in 2025 is announced. And we've got some awesome podcast episodes with more members of our team discussing their picks for the list of top 50 destinations. So get excited. I guarantee you're going to want to add a ton of these destinations to your 2025 travel bucket list. And remember to find the article by searching Travel Lemming, Places to Travel, wherever you surf the web. And on that note, don't forget to check out the rest of Travel Lemming. You can type in any destination that you're interested in the search bar on our homepage. And chances are one of our amazing experts from around the globe has already written a travel guide on it. Our library of thousands of different guides is always human first because, after all, nobody knows real travel like real people. We also have new perspective pieces coming up every single week, and we have meetups in 8 cities around the US. So right now we have Chicago, Denver, San Juan, Nashville, San Francisco, Vancouver, Seattle, of course, and then there's Phoenix where you can see me. So if you live in any of these areas, we would love to meet you. So you can come talk travel over a pint. We'll have a great time. You can also sign up for a year of ad-free content by getting the Travel Lemming Passport. All you have to do is use the code LEMMING on our website. That's LEMMING. That's all for today. We hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you to Chelsea Booker for your Seattle expertise. You were a lovely podcast guest. And make sure that if you have any comments, questions, concerns, anything that you want to tell us about the show, please feel free to tell us in the comments. We really enjoy hearing from you, and we want to hear from you. As always, travel safe, and we'll see you next time.